How can we make European migration policy more human, more kind-hearted? And what can a humanitarian organization do to help? These are the two main questions for this session, in which we discuss the political challenges of migration. Because the topic of migration is increasingly being politicized, placing humanitarian organization in the middle of a political battle. That's why KUNO is organizing a series of events discussing current trends in migration and their significance for human actors. Again, hence the questions. How can we make European migration policy more human, more kind-hearted, and what can humanitarian organizations do to help? In this session, we have the great honor to have three great people. Our main host, Tineke Strik, member of European Parliament, the Greens, the Groen Links, will reflect on European migration policy and the hot topics of the political discussion about migration at the moment, and the difficulty of creating a human, kind-hearted European migration policy. My name is Bahram Sadeghi, and I'm a journalist. I'm born in Iran. When I was 18 years old, I left Iran and arrived in Holland in 1986. And now I'm living in Amsterdam. And very briefly about my background, my background is journalism and writing. And right now my background is probably a very ugly IKEA closet. Enough about me. Let's talk about the main subject and introduce my co-hosts, because I have two co-hosts. Anila Noor, Managing Director, New Women Connectors, and Benoit de Gries, Head of Program and Advocacy at Stichting Vluchteling. Anila, Managing Director of New Women Connectors, and you are so, I have, like at least 26 titles what you are doing and what you have been doing: an activist, advisor for refugee issues and for European Commission, for international NGOs, civil societies organization, United Nations, and you yourself are a political refugee from Pakistan, now living in the Netherlands. Just very brief question, looking back to the at our last session, previous session, when we talk about the migration law with Thomas Spijkerboer. What was your main takeaway of that session, please?
Thank you, Bahram, and thank you so much for again inviting me to co-host this. I think if I reflect to the previous conversation, it was specifically to highlight and to memorize and give us a reflection of refugee-life relation in Europe, with the starting the history of Geneva Convention of 1952, and we really saw how the important question which was rising, how the rights being violated, especially under this Geneva Convention of 1951, especially on the border control and the role of human rights courts, and how we are today talk about this relevance with this migration flow, with the migration crisis, and humanitarian organization, how they are responding that, and how this have been changed or need change or need to understand the implementations. And the initial change requires of understanding how it's been received by the states, by the laws, which we can say as an audience, and how it has to be counter to make it more implement, so we address human rights. And also, if I reflect as a conclusion from my side of the previous session, I think we really understand this is undeniable importance of Geneva Convention. But unfortunately, this refugee law, when it's come to Europe, it's become like European centric, and we need to change this European Eurocentric approach towards refugee law, people who are coming, and how we can, even if we are talking about this refugee law is different when it comes to implementation, because there are so many gray areas, and that's we felt that law is there, it is very important, but implementation needs to be equal, intersectional, and really make to help towards helping human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nella. Okay, Benoit de Gries, Head of Programs and Advocacy at Stichting Vluchteling, and you have been around the block working for MSF Belgium and the Netherlands, and including country director in Afghanistan and operational manager with the responsibility for several countries in Africa and Asia. And I know Stichting Vluchteling, I can say quite well, is very involved in with migration and refugee related issues in Europe. If I ask you, Benoit, what is the main topic you would like to address today with Tineke? From all the topics, important topics, what would you like to address to Tineke?
Yeah, thanks, Bahram. Thanks also, KUNO, for the invitation, and very happy to have the opportunity to talk with Tineke today. As you say, for Stichting Vluchteling, it's a topic that becomes more and more urgent. We're more and more also working in Europe on migration with people that are excluded from help. And there's actually, I cannot have one question, so I'll take two. So one of it is, of course, a bit the question, and it was also touched upon in the previous session when you talked about the laws around it. For me, it's interesting at the political debate also, what can we do with both the member states in their own, in the domestic environment, and Europe, like at what level do you need to do the advocacy, and is there a way to use both to strengthen indeed the focus more on what also was explained last time, a bit the rights-based approach and not the security angle, which we see is being used everywhere in a very populistic way. While at the same time we noticed that the support for refugees at the communal level, at the cities, at the CBOs, the NGOs, but also we did a survey in the Netherlands on the perception towards refugees, and it has improved, also linked to Ukraine, right? And what can we do as organizations to piggyback a bit on that little shift that we see? I don't think it's an overwhelming shift, but what can we do? Because I think, and that's maybe also a reflection on last time, and then I'll end. I saw in the first session that the NGOs said, yeah, we are neutral and we shouldn't speak up. And I actually think we disagree. I think NGOs should speak up because this is about solidarity with very marginalized and excluded people. But we have to be realistic that in some cases, speaking out might lead to reduction of access. And that's where I'm interested. Okay, being on the ground and being a witness is important. There's other people who can speak out. Tineke Strik is one of them. But also, what do you see as recommendations in terms of collaborations with the human rights watchers, the amnesties? So it's a long question, but it's about what can we do advocacy-wise in the host countries where abuses are happening towards European Union, and what kind of networked approach should we work? Because I think.
Oh, no. Benoit, I have enough. We have great questions, especially the last one was one of the questions, we would definitely address about, how to speak out as a humanitarian organization in a political environment. How? When is it necessary or not? Why or why not? Having said that, just a couple of practical issues. We are recording this session, especially the first part of the session when our three speakers exchange ideas, and especially when Tineke start to talk, and I will put it on YouTube. And but you, please, the people who are watching, if you have any questions, please wait for about, let's say, 45 minutes after we know enough about the positions of our speakers. So maybe your question by that time has been addressed. But if not, please send your question immediately to us through the chat, and I will ask Peter or Laurie, the two people of KUNO who are behind the scene, behind the screen, to pass the questions. And because we have a lot of great people from MSF, Red Cross, Stichting Vluchteling, Dutch Council of Refugees, Vluchtelingenwerk, and other people. I really look forward to see those issues. And now it's time for the woman of the hour to introduce. Yes, Tineke, we are talking about you. So please put your sound on. And we, as I said, focus will be political challenges of migration And as a member of parliament, the Greens, Groen Links, I'm so glad that you made time for us. So if I ask you, on this great rainy day in Holland, what is currently the main hot topic, or plural hot topics of debate in the European Union when it comes to migration? Please take it away.
Thanks, Bahram, and thanks a lot for organizing this event and this whole series of events. I think it's really great to to create a kind of think tank and to exchange thoughts and ideas on how to impact the policies, because that's greatly needed. And I always feel a bit humble working, talking together with NGOs, people who are really working in the most difficult circumstances on the ground. And one of the issues, I think, is also criminalization of NGOs, etc. So this climate becomes more and more harsh. Yeah, there's indeed not one topic, but let me try to sketch a little bit the current situation and debate. Of course, since 2015, the climate really has changed. The position also of the European Commission has changed, very much in support of the member states. And since then, the Commission tries to get new legislation on asylum and migration, a new asylum pact. Until now, they didn't manage to find any agreement among each other. And I think this is due to the main, divisive topic, and that's the lack of an equal responsibility sharing between the member states. I mean, the Dublin system, as you all know, this first entry criteria actually blocks the possibility of having a proportionate distribution of asylum seekers, which would enable all member states to deal with asylum applicants and applications in a swift but also careful way, and also would enable asylum seekers to immediately have access to proper reception centers and so on. Now, the last term, member states didn't manage to find agreement. This Commission came up with a fresh start, a fresh pact. But what we see actually is that the Commission is already in its proposals giving in to the member states, coming up with a proposal to keep the first entry criteria and to increase the solidarity on the basis of a voluntariness. So in my view, the legislative proposals we are all working on does not include the sustainable solution that we need for the current problems of the asylum system. Because actually, whereas border countries do not get any assurances of a fair distribution, they will be confronted with even more responsibilities by having these border procedures, which will lead to more people being put in detention for probably a long time, because many applicants have to be processed there. And at the same time, also, the responsibility gets even bigger because, whereas now after 1.5 years, this responsibility is removed, is abolished, it will now last much longer. So people who travel onward, they can be returned for a long time back to the country of first entry. And the punishment, yeah? You are muted, Bahram.
Thank you, Tineke. Just to get, excuse me for interrupting, just to get it clear, are you in favor or are you opposing the notion, the concept of first country of arrival, the Dublin rule?
No, I'm very much in favor of abolishing it, of lifting it. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
We also made a paper just before the Commission proposals came out, where we sketched a system that would lead to registering everyone at the border, and then immediately taking into account the preferences, family ties, languages, so not only solidarity, because this is already showing like, you know, we have to support the border countries, but simply common responsibility.
Okay, I get it. Go on.
Okay, so this is not part of the solutions on the table now, but even there, the member states seem to think that this proposal of the Commission is going too far, actually. So what they now did just a week ago, they came up with a provisional agreement on the screening regulation, which obliges the member states at the borders to register everyone in a quick way, meaning, you know, fueling their responsibility, because everyone who's registered can be returned. The Eurodac proposal, which enlarges the groups of people that have to be checked through all the databases. So that also leads to criminalization, actually, and stigmatization of asylum seekers. And on the Schengen Border Code, which actually leads to the reduction of the border crossing points, the possibilities for member states to have less access at the borders, the possibility to return people at the internal borders immediately back to the first countries without individual assessments, and to more ethnic profiling because of more border controls by the police near the borders in the framework of combating irregular migration. So only restrictive changes leading to more criminalization of asylum seekers and migrants, and not relieving the pressure at the external border countries. And this is really problematic. It's fueling the securitization of the migration policies, very much a focus on border control. And in order to get the border countries, the 5 Met, on board, they made up a kind of member states declaration with the view to establish a voluntary, temporarily solidarity mechanism. That's a full sentence, but at the same time, it's very permissive, because member states can simply choose to be part of that mechanism or not, and they can choose how many people they relocate. They can choose if they do only financial support. So it's out of the legislative framework, so we don't have any influence. And at the same time, it's no solution for the current Dublin problems that we see.
By the way, I can see that Benoit and Anila, they're writing, you know, and stuff. But just one question, you know, just for me as a layman, you know, when you're talking about the securitization of asylum process, could you please a little bit elaborate about that? What are the let's say, concrete or the moral moral issues regarding to that?
Well, it's, you know, what actually happens is that migrations are more and more framed as a security risk, as a security danger, and as such require certain policy responses, often affecting their fundamental rights. If you look, for instance, very clearly in the instrumentalization regulation, that's a new proposal as a response to what happened in Belarus, where migrants were sent to the border. There actually you see the whole idea that reflects that we are threatened by our neighboring countries because sending migrants is a security threat. And therefore we have to limit access of those asylum seekers to our systems, and also deprive them from the core rights that asylum seekers have, like they can be detained for a longer time, they can be they have to remain at the borders for a longer time, return procedures are swifter and without the procedural safeguards. And by framing, by increasingly using that frame, it seems to be more easy to take away these fundamental rights safeguards. And because they are more or less integrated in this whole, in a foreign policy, security policy, instead of looking at people looking for protection. And that really has far-reaching consequences. You also see it at the borders, where fences are, before fences were never paid with EU money, but now government leaders really demand from the Commission that they can build fences with EU money, they can use technologies with EU money, and you see that the whole defense industry, weapon industry is really using, this development and fueling this development to enlarge their market actually for these technologies. So a lot of money is going into that direction instead of providing more protection channels for asylum seekers.
But Tineke, we cannot blame them, the defense companies and the fences company, let's say, take advantage of this, because that's the result, that's the direct consequence of what you call the securitization of the policy.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
In a way, they are just doing what everyone in a capitalistic society would do, so if there is demand for it, I will provide you fences and radars and ships and everything to do the job. So,
absolutely.
yeah,
no, you're completely you're completely right. I mean, they jump on the wagon that EU governments of the EU has started to drive, and they but it's also fueling that direction. This is just what I want to say, and there's no control at all on those on these policies for more and more getting acquainted with these industries, like we also saw with Frontex a year ago or 1.5 years ago, that they have very close ties, and that should be scrutinized as well. So maybe a few other elements that Please. I want to, because so I don't believe that this new pact will lead to anything. I'm afraid that the council, actually now with this partial agreement on a few files, has declared the rest of the pact dead. I don't think that we will get a new legislation as a successor of Dublin, and that this is it we have to deal with. And this actually shows that there is no readiness, but also even no ability to find sustainable solution for the internal policies. Whereas at the same time, due to this, distraction to new legislation for 7 years now, the implementation, and Anila also mentioned the importance of implementation, has completely neglected. I mean, normally the Commission needs to make evaluation reports every 3 years on how member states comply with all the rules, because the rules are out there. We already have great directives on standards. But what we see is that they are ignored, actually, especially regarding, of course, the pushbacks. They are blatantly violating the core rights, access to an asylum procedure, and all the rest that should come after that. We don't have any, we are co-legislators and we can scrutinize policies, but it's very difficult for us to, actually, we cannot force the Commission to act as guardian of the treaty, to police actually the member states who are violating the rules. And this is what I found pretty frustrating, I must say. What we do is time after time using, for instance, all the reports of UN, Council of Europe, NGOs, to confront them with the evidence. So this is one of the functions also of NGOs, also we will discuss later on, I think, showing that, look, there's no need to debate if it happens or not. We have sufficient evidence that this is happening and a systematic scale. So you have to act upon it. And next week, we will present a study where we also show to the Commission that these reports are sufficient basis for starting infringement procedures, for instance, to those member states, and to cut funding, especially funding regarding border management, of member states who are violating those rules. So we want to show the Commission they have sufficient tools which they should use in order to enforce compliance. Now the member states experience impunity. Yeah.
Just to get it clear, you said there is no debate. You know, let's not. In a way, you said let's not abuse it. You know, there is no debate about the violations of the refugee laws. Is that a fact? Are all of your colleagues, are they all convinced? They know? Is there information, knowledge? Are they all agree that the refugee laws has been violated? Or is it something like, you know, I don't know, like climate change, you know? You know what I mean? Yeah. 90%
You know,
says that, but there are still people, you know, who are evidence-based, say no, there is maybe global change, but it's not man-made. So there is violation, but it's not in the system. You know, it's just just once in a time event. You know, like exception. You know.
No. It started a little bit like that when it emerged. And then even the Commission could say, yeah, we lack the evidence, etc.
Yeah.
But you know, also MEPs, governments, the Commission, they cannot maintain this narrative due to the increasing number of reports, not only from NGOs but from authoritative bodies that are very clear.
Cool.
Still, the Commission has moved. It's still a little bit hanging in this narrative because it's now saying, but look, we are enforcing that there are monitor mechanisms at the borders. You're saying Greece and Croatia should have monitor mechanisms. And then we have evidence, and then we can force the governments to start investigations or penalize this individual border guards that has violated the rules. Whereas we say, look, it doesn't work now because on the one hand, we don't need monitor mechanisms anymore. I mean, we know the facts, and it's systematic. So it's not an individual official that you could penalize and then it's over. It's systematic. It's the government. But during the Frontex inquiry, I really became aware of that the narrative has changed from is it true or not into, but why shouldn't it be legitimate to do so? So now the question is more like, yes, but we are allowed to prevent departure. And that is actually the same as preventing entrance. If so, and then Frontex really, that Jerry, started to make that frame like, yeah, but we are confronted with a hybrid threat at the external borders from Turkey, from Belarus. So that means we have to change our policies. So, and that's even a more dangerous direction, of course, if it's really disputing the core rules that are out there since the Refugee Convention.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, in a way, like they say, when you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail.
Exactly.
So when you have those boats and grounds and ships, let's use them. Let's use them because we have them, and maybe we can
let's legalize it.
Policy exactly.
Yeah.
To really use them in a proper way for okay, you established that very interesting point. So we are now about half an hour on our way. We still have about an hour to go, and I see a lot of messages coming, a lot of great and very critical messages coming. So you go on for about, I guess, maybe 10 minutes, Tineke.
Okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, fine.
You go on for 10 minutes, and then I will give floor to our co-hosts, and after that, we are going to discuss the messages if they haven't been discussed till that moment. Please.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I see these pushbacks and the impunity as really part of the rule of law crisis that we have in the European Union, and I think it's important also to categorize it like that, to qualify it like that. and not only, this is something only with migration law, so there you can have derogations. And I think that the tools of the rule of law should be used here as well, like cutting funding and really act to enforce it. And another part of which is very clearly connected to the rule of law is this shrinking space for civil society. And there is this criminalization. It also is becoming really widespreading. I mean, first we saw it in Poland and in Hungary as part of this autocratic regime, but now it's increased very clear. The special rapporteur on human rights defenders yesterday came up with a press conference concluding this as well, that the hostile environment in Greece is really suffocating the position of the NGOs, but also in Croatia. So it really fits in the same system, because the oppression and the exclusion and violence against migrants and refugees, which NGOs try to compensate for. They rescue them, they provide aid, they speak up, has to be oppressed as well in order to sustain these policies of exclusion and oppression. So therefore, it's also very important to pay attention to that as well. Again, for the European Parliament, we can only, in a marginal way, try to we can only indirectly put pressure on the member states through the Commission. But then again, the Commission has to act, has to take this seriously. Now, my last point, and this also relates to what I said, this debating what member states actually have to do at their external border. Should they really grant access for asylum procedures? This is, I think, related to the external dimension, to the migration deals, in which the EU is more and more shifting its responsibility to other countries. And where it started with only agreements on readmission, you see now more and more also agreements on border control, restricting border control, but also giving responsibility to transit countries to readmit people who just transited their country, so not of their own nationals, and also to strengthen their border controls. And
what do you mean transit countries? Could you please name
like Turkey, like Libya.
Libya, okay.
Because in international law, no, Greece is a member state of the EU.
Greece is a member state. Okay, Italy,
Yeah.
Greece, no. So really, the outside borders of Europe, yes.
Yeah, where in international law, there is an argument to say countries, should grant the right to their own nationals to return. Transit countries do not have an international obligation to take back, like with the EU-Turkey deal. So that comes along with tit for tat, with money or less human rights criticism, et cetera, in exchange for their cooperation. And this has a lot of human rights implications, because this is not on the table. Human rights are no criteria for with which third country we are cooperating. Look at Libya, but also many others. There's no human rights impact assessment before, prior to such a cooperation, like what does it mean, for instance, from refugees who get stuck in a third country because of this agreement. And there's no balance in what we finance. So, we finance a lot more in pulling back people, in border control, than in improving or strengthening protection systems in other countries. And of course, it's not compensated with more resettlement and more responsibility sharing. We made a report also there. It's like a bit like showing that the little power that we have in the parliament, because normally we are, we have to give consent to formal agreements with third countries. But in this area, the EU is having taken more and more recourse to informal cooperation. So these are like deals, statements, memorandum of understanding, soft law, where European Parliament is out sideline, and the Court of Justice as well. And I made a report. It was I made an initiative report which was supported by the European Parliament, where we came up with all these demands actually from human rights impact assessment, a monitoring system that we really see what the impact is and then act upon it, and make it formal a cooperation so that it is in the protective system of the treaties. Well, this is adopted, but still the Commission and the member states go on with their direction. So now I really try to find ways to get more grip on it. For instance, with the funding, if you look how much funding goes to Libya, and you actually see that it's also leading to the strengthening of the detention systems, actually means that we are increasing the impossibility of migrants to escape from their own perpetrators, those militias in Libya. And yeah, that should not be able to stand any human rights assessment from the EU. So this is what I'm trying to, I'm really exploring different avenues to get more grip on that. And I really need NGOs for that as well. I'm really grateful for this Out of Libya report, for instance, that MSF released last week, because they are one of the few NGOs working there, and they can really confront us with the facts on the ground, and so that we can act upon it, which makes our call much more credible and urgent.
Tineke, just two very, I hope, very short questions, just to get it clear. And then, as I said, I will give floor to Benoit and Anila for their remarks till 1 o'clock, max. Then we have half an hour to discuss the questions of our audience, because they are here with us. I'm glad that they have sent so many questions. Just to get it clear, you said you cannot force the Commission to follow your recommendations. Is that a technical question that you cannot do that? So in order to force them, so everything within European regulation should change, or is it only your problem? They don't listen to your recommendation.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, more legally speaking, there have been a lot of judgments already from the court, where not only from the European Parliament, but otherwise that the Commission was sued for failure to act, for failure to act as a guardian of the treaty. And the court consistently says, look, the Commission has its own toolbox with very different type of tools, and it has its own discretion to what tools to use. I would really like to try to provoke actually a judgment with the argument, look, the Commission is not using any tool it has as its toolbox. Cool. And is that acceptable or not? And politically speaking, in principle, the European Parliament can adopt a motion of censure, like a distrust, which should lead to the resignation of the Commission as a whole. This is a very heavy weapon. Wow. Yeah. Which is now in discussion for the fact that the Commission is willing to grant Poland recovery funding. Yeah. But for this issue, we will never get a majority. Okay. The other question, you said there is no human rights assessment, no obligation in advance for all this regulation. For example, when we are talking or dealing with Libya or anything, it's it sounds quite bad. You should everything. Every regulation. You want to get it through, it should be tested by human rights. But is it me? Am I so naive? No. I mean, there is a kind of better regulation framework where the Commission, Council, and Parliament have also agreed that for legislative proposals which can have a significant impact on certain areas, there should be an impact assessment before, and human rights should take part of that.
Yeah.
And there you see it with formal agreements. Sometimes you have that, but the point is these are all informal arrangements. So it's not legislation as such.
Yeah, I get it.
But even with migration legislation, like the return directive, which I'm rapporteur of, and this whole new pact, it has hardly any impact assessment, because the Commission says all the time, sorry, we didn't have any time for doing that because it is so urgent. We immediately had to throw out the legislative proposals.
Okay.
So they're also undermining their own principles on better regulation.
Okay, now it's time for our co-hosts. I saw, Benoit, you have been writing, for at least 35 minutes, my man. And Anila, so which one of you would like to start off? Just raise your hand and I give you the floor. And unmute. Anila,
Yes.
would you like to start?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, Tineke. You really, highlighted very difficult and uncomfortable points, which is happening in EU policy. And being my position as a part of European Commission expert group on migration, we are giving them this reflection from the communities. You really highlighted the shrinking space for the, international humanitarian agency and NGOs to reflect and talk. And I will say, reflecting and representing our community from the migration background, we felt it's more difficult for us to intervene, because what's happening in the negotiation discussion, the representation or meaningful participation of migrant and refugee, especially as a woman's voice, has been missing. And that's what we are advocating, and we are super happy to have you here in this discussion, so we can make sure we create more solidarity in a more strong way. We need to speak up. We need to say no to all this when they're especially talking about securitization of what? Instead of securing lives of human, they are securing life of their
Exactly.
borders, life of future business of their agencies. That's why, because our voice is being cut, our voice is being stopped. That's why they are making more and more business plan about making more, especially this digitalization is so scary and it's alarming. And as we reflect, we don't need this securitization and on the border, especially to make drones or digitalization to use artificial intelligence, because it's so scary. If we say already artificial intelligence use, it's not familiar. If they scan my face from a brown face coming from, and there, it's already a big debate. So thank you so much for raising this question, especially Bahram, you mentioned the metaphor of harm. I think it shows the power control, and I think this is happening. We are member states; they are struggling how to position themselves, how to position their power negotiation. We need to understand this whole system. So that's why we need to create this kind of platform, discussion, and collaboration, solidarity to ask, request, and advocate a systematic change. We can't again and again blame the system. This is the time to ask for the change the system, where we member states who are willing to work for the refugees, to creating them and to have more flexible human migration policy. So this is the time to change. I think Ukraine crisis shows the willingness. If we want, we can do it, but we want to make more inclusive and welcoming response from Europe as an equal and intersectional base.
Okay. By the way, just one question for you, and you say we want to advocate for more refugees, and one of the messages we got from Tom de Veer, he said, "Why would you advocate for refugees? Most people agree they need support. The question is where to support them." In our investigations, we see that about 70% of the Dutch want refugees to properly accommodated in the region.
Yeah,
So, Anila, would you please reflect on that, and then I will give the floor to to Benoit. Yeah.
Yes, no, thank you, Bahram. I think in the theory, this question is 100% right. We all agree. But again, I in my introductory remark, I said when it's come how to make sure when it comes in implementation, when it's come to the different communities who need that as a from the migration background. It like if you see, I will refer to again the Ukraine crisis. They're amazing. We appreciate this response, but we shouldn't put vulnerabilities in a competition. We shouldn't forget about to take the previous initiative, previous allocation to accommodate new one. So this is our worry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. By the way, there are more questions relating to that, relating to how the popular vote, the popular view in European countries would look like. Benoit, first, do you have any takeaways from what Tineke just said, please?
Yeah, thanks. I found this super interesting because it brings a lot of information together. And I think everybody picks up pieces left and right. I think maybe one is indeed what I wrote down. Indeed, it's a rule of law crisis. The tools are there. There's not a willingness to confront. Member states have other priorities, and then, yeah, as Tineke said, there's a lot of bickering, and I'll do this, and then you give me that. So there's no willingness to enforce the law that is in place actually right now. So that brings me back to the question that I asked earlier, like, well, yeah, I don't see that changing easily, given the political climates. Tineke looks very passionate and positive, but I would like to hear a bit how do you preserve that, and what angles do you see? You listed a few, and that's a question also that you mentioned the Out of Libya report from MSF. So you said that was very useful, but on the other hand, also you say, well, on the pushbacks, data is there. There's nothing to prove anymore, right? So that's because a lot of organizations, they are on the ground also to document, like the Border Violence Monitoring Network and whatnot. So a lot of organizations still think, including myself, that data might help. But now I'm thinking, well, maybe in some cases the facts are out there and that part has been played. So that was one question. And then the securitization one comes also in the Poland example. When we were on the border with White Russia in autumn, I mean, we saw that militarization in such a degree that it was never seen before. I mean, these were a few hundred people, and it was like that there was an invasion starting. So I think and I found it so confronting because that was actually normal. It was normalized. So that the threat of the invasion, I'm using that word because that was used in the media as well, there was very, very limited popular reflection on, is this still normal? And on top of that, then the European Commission granted Poland exemptions to the law. And say, yeah, because they're such a danger, you can detain them twice as long. I forgot now the details. And yeah, it's fine if you don't have time for these people to actually apply for asylum. And I wonder if that trickle effect that we saw there. How do you reflect on that? Because yeah, now I'm closing. Because indeed I was looking for where do you see hope, right? And for me, what happened at the White Russian border, Belarus. Yeah, I don't know. I got quite depressed on that. And indeed now also the segregation that we see in Poland with people coming from Ukraine. Also there, I mean, it's been mentioned at the sidelines, but yeah. So it's not necessarily reflection. It's more reflections, less direct questions. And I have points on the question on the reception in the region, but we can talk about that later maybe.
Yeah. Tineke, I saw you writing the question. I'm very glad that you wrote the question. I will give you floor in a couple of minutes, but going back to Benoit, just a question for you, the same question I asked Anila, and the same question, that Tom De Veer just mentioned, why would you advocate for refugees, and first that, and should, you as a humanitarian organization, get involved in public debate about migration? Is that, you probably mentioned that in the beginning, but since these questions pops up, I thought, maybe it wouldn't hurt to ask you again, should you move into the public discussion about migration, and why or why not? What are the different sides of this move could be?
Yeah. It's a very good question, and I'm afraid a complex answer. I think
that's why we asked you to be here with us. That's why we asked Anila and Tineke. Go on, I'm listening.
Look, for me, it starts with the basic question, like, what's the identity of NGOs, right? And the N is very important. I sometimes feel that we forget that we are non-governmental organizations, right? And what we do as NGOs, civil society, whether we're development, humanitarian, there's a whole plethora of organizations, but it stems with solidarity, right? It's about standing with people that are neglected, that are often through policies of governments are put on the sidelines, that are not allowed to have their rights recognized or supported. That's where it comes from. And of course, then, especially as humanitarian organizations, you want to help people with their immediate needs, right? Yeah. So that's more from an impartial logic than a neutral logic. You want to help the people with the most needs, and these are often the people excluded, right? Then that's for me. That's where it starts. Then often we work in very ethically complex environments. Libya is probably one of the most striking ones. And for me, and yes, you mentioned I have a background in MSF, because being in those locations, I was responsible for the programs with the Rohingyas in Myanmar. I find it very difficult to be there and document and see what's happening while not taking that information with you to try to alter the situation, right? Often in these situations, NGOs can be complicit, because the last exercise on here, you talked about Morocco, I think, whereby NGOs are being they take over the role of the state in providing support for displaced people. Right? And if you do that without asking questions, I think you can become complicit, right? But if you are in these places and you document and then use that information to try to improve the situation, then you're trying to still remediate the situation. Now the question is, how public should you go with it? And that's where I think there's different organizations with different mandates. I think we are, by definition, part of the public debate, but sometimes less vocal, sometimes more factual. Like, for example, MSF often makes factual statements. So they say, like, we saw so many people that were victims of sex. The conclusions, sometimes MSF leaves to others, right? Other organizations will put a political statement within what should be done. So I think there, your prescriptive approach or your factual approach, that can change, and it's often also a choice on what's the risk of speaking out or not. Yeah. Right. So that's the balance of it. But often also when you talk with, I said in the introduction, you talk with human rights, for example, they said we don't necessarily need the INGOs or the national organization or the CBOs to do the speaking out. We can do that, right? So I think we don't need to always talk about what we do. It's how we work within the system. And that was also my question to Tineke, indeed. Yeah. Does she feel that NGOs are smart enough in using the information that they have? Do we know what is missing for people like Tineke to actually influence the debate where possible. Because then I'll stop. I think, yeah, we're driven by compassion, empathy, and solidarity. The work on the ground often takes a lot of headspace, so that the advocacy part sometimes is not well developed enough.
Yeah,
I think this is a good form. So that's in a nutshell.
Cool. Let's see for the final half an hour. First, I would like Tineke to respond, because you got a couple of questions, especially from Benoit. And then, as I said, we have really great questions from the audience. So I hope we have at least 25 minutes to discuss that. And I'm going to, I will invite the audience to ask more questions if they want, because it's the moment. So first, Tineke.
Yeah, thanks, Benoit. I definitely see the added value of data and, you know, a continuous update of those data. Actually, we really need that, because you see that some reports, for instance, also from investigative journalists, right, and organizations working on the ground, it really, you know, it fuels the debate. It is used, you know, in order to ask pertinent questions and to have those topics on the table. But for instance, with Croatia, there is a long list of reports only from last year. But since the Commission, because Croatia really wants to be part of Schengen, so they had to do something with that. And then they said, okay, we will establish an independent monitor mechanism, which is not independent. And they are now advocating for having this access to Schengen. And then they also came to me and said, look, but all those reports, they're outdated, because now we have this monitor mechanism. So, you know, they are not about this moment, but from the past. So that shows that it's even dangerous to stop coming up with those data, because governments immediately use that, saying, look, now things have improved. But still, I think it's up to, you know, the institutions to take those data seriously and really do something with it. And I mentioned the lack of monitoring and impact assessment. I really can imagine that NGOs providing humanitarian assistance actually have to concentrate on their main task. But maybe there could be a kind of consortium or whatever, where every organization takes its own role, but that we ensure we have something like a monitor mechanism, but maybe kind of shadow monitoring mechanism, not an official one, but making sure that we use everything that we know for also improving the policies, for putting more pressure and confronting the policymakers with the consequences of these policies. I think we should work on that more. Yeah, the Belarus. Yeah, it was very cynical to see, and not only at that moment that they were allowed to have these derogations, but both Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia have changed their national laws, and they are now allowing for pushback. So where we, with Croatia and Greece, we can say, you know, does it happen or not? There it's very clear. The government say, we think it's okay. And still the Commission doesn't want to act upon it. So this actually has opened up this, it has, let's say, disguised actually the policy of the Commission. But does it help? Does it help in solving this crisis? No. The way that this crisis was solved, this geopolitical crisis was solved with geopolitical answers. I mean, Merkel started to have phone calls with Putin and with Lukashenko. Commissioner Skinas went to Iraq and all those countries where the migrants came from, and it has been solved. And so I think that's very important to show. Pushbacks do not help to solve any conflict with neighboring countries. It simply undermines the rights of migrants and asylum seekers. That's all it does. So yeah, and there also I think it shows that we should really be reflective more of this migration deal and externalization policies, the impact of it, because what it means, we are exposing our dependency on third countries for their cooperation on migration, because migration has become top priority for the EU. Neighboring countries know that, and especially autocrats. They are willing to abuse this eagerness. So I think we should make ourselves much less vulnerable by coping with these with the migration issue on our own in a more sustainable way, instead of simply shifting responsibility, because that's really undermining our own policy, foreign policy as well.
Maybe now is the moment to go to the audience questions. And so let me see. We discussed it a little bit, but nevertheless, I'm going to put it in the air. Please raise your hand if you want, especially Anila. I haven't heard you for quite a long time. So this question, is this new initiative of the EU not more of whatever have already seen in the past? There simply is no motivation among EU populations to take up refugees from outside Europe, while the motivation is high for accommodation in the region, including proper support for these accommodations by rich countries. Yeah, Anila, you.
Yes. Now I will just say, yes, it is. EU policies, when it's come to European Commission, they are trying to improve, but they have their own limitation. That's why I'm saying and emphasizing again, we need to ask for the systematic change, because European Commission, when they propose these policies, member states have internal arguments or disagree on these policies, because implementation happening in countries, and in these countries is happening on the city level. So there are multiple layers we need to understand. And when this come to welcoming response for the refugees or even migrants, because in some countries like in Italy, Spain, and other side of the country, there are more flows of the migrants. And central countries like Germany, France, Netherlands, they have more influx of the refugees inside. So we need to understand how we tackle in these terms who has having migrants or refugees. So sometimes these terms also clash in, because we are not agreeing. These definitions are helping to define who's refugee, who's migrant, but instead of putting instant and active response, we are just discussing, okay, who is refugee, who is refugee not, who is migrant, who is not migrant. So it's not helping. So this is also a matter. And also I think the main thing which is being a little bit missing in our debate today is narratives. Narrative matters a lot, because narratives have so much deep impact. That's why Tineke mentioned about the data, because data helps us to understand how we are describing, having discussion about migrant and refugees. So this comes to the people, very local people from the natives, who always wanted and really willing to help refugees or migrants communities who are coming here, but it's not showcased so far. It's not coming as a good example. So that's the thing we need to put there, and to use good narratives to showcase and visualize working with migrant and refugee communities as a partner, not only as a beneficiary.
Yeah. There is one question where the person who is asking the question put two of those concepts which we mentioned, solidarity and narrative, in the same question. So let me see. Solidarity between the member states is not possible without support within member states. Mainstream migration narrative is negative. Even more reception in the region is only in the region, except when it suits us. Need for labor. See the UK that wants to develop its own Bill of Rights, also in Netherlands that wants to look at the reception in Rwanda. By the way, that's probably, you have maybe heard about that our Minister of Foreign Affairs Schrijnemacher, she said that she would look at this Rwanda concept. She would look, she didn't condemn that, she would look at it. How to have a more realistic narrative maintaining human rights rather than getting away from it. Tineke, I'm afraid that's a question for you. There are a lot of, there is a lot of things, you know, that will come all to your
Anila, Anila is perfectly right. It narrative, I mean, this word is sometimes also abused, of course, but it's true that the public opinion is crucial for the support of refugees. Tom van der Meer is also referring to that often in the chat I saw, and therefore we need to take that into account. But you know, the whole frame of refugees is also very much abused by politicians who want to gain more popularity and who do not care about those human rights. And I therefore would also like to respond not only on this between the member states, but also on the external dimension, because Tom actually more or less says, you know, this is what people want, to have them accommodated in the region. Let me make very clear, I think we should have, we should work much more on with the facts, with the global facts that we are facing with. 86% of the refugees are hosted in the region. And those countries are often poor, they are fragile, and they are lacking sustainable funding for hosting those. Okay, Tom, we studied the facts. No, that's great. We need those facts. But there is indeed a huge lack of sustainable funding of the refugees, so that refugees stuck there lack sufficient access to education, lack access to the labor market, etc., etc. They cannot build a new future. At the same time, 4 years ago, the Global Compact on the Refugees, EU countries also expressed their support for more equal responsibility for refugees worldwide. And this is really in contrast with the ongoing externalization, because instead of taking up more responsibility, we are simply shifting it with detrimental effects, not only in our EU member state, but also in third countries, who are also strengthening their border controls, also readmitting people to others. So in the whole chain, actually also affecting regional mobility. In Africa, like ECOWAS, it becomes harder and harder to enjoy free movement. This is what we should be more aware of. And I know also at the UN level, for instance, the EU's reputation on this is really affected, because we are not credible anymore if it comes to advocating for human rights elsewhere in the world. So in that sense, also our position is being undermined by our own policies. And it doesn't mean that, you know, the numbers should be always equally distributed. I think we should do much more with sustainable funding. I would be very much in favor of a kind of global refugee fund, where every state would contribute to in a proportionate way, so that wherever a refugee is, there is sufficient guarantee of financial and material support. But UNHCR also states for a long time already, 10% of the refugees being hosted in the region need a higher standard of protection. So they should be at least taken by the more wealthy countries and continents like EU, Australia, US, because they need more care. And I think in this way, with more material, financial funding, and not in exchange for border control, but in exchange for proper access to education, proper access to labor market, then you can really make a difference. And then there you really reduce the need for people to flee further, because they can have a future elsewhere there. but also taking physical responsibility, because we are also not credible for those hosting regions if we at the same time are reluctant in taking our share as well. Because, you know, let's be honest, this resentment that we are experiencing here is also vividly present in Lebanon, in Turkey, in many other countries hosting millions of refugees. So we have to be more rational on that, taking into account the opinion of the people, but also be fair and honest with our citizens. Also picturing the fact refugees cannot depend on their own countries. That's the whole point, of course. So we can only comply with the Refugee Convention if we do that in an equal, responsible way. There are now 100 million refugees. It's doable to do that on a global scale, but we need to step up our own responsibility in that way, because if you look at it, we are far lagging behind if it comes to the responsibility share that we take.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you're talking about people in refugees in the region, you said something like 82%. What was it? Something more than 86%. So it means that still, when we are talking about 100 million refugees, so it means that there are still 40 million people, are not in their own region. So my question, just final question about that topic.
May I say sorry,
No
Bahram,
problem.
because this number of more than 100 includes the displaced persons, and more than
in
half.
Own country.
Yes,
country,
they stay in their own country, and that's more than half.
Yeah.
So I think maybe 60 million is displaced.
Yeah.
And then we only talk about, but we talk then about, let's say, 40 million outside of the country.
Yeah. By the way, I've been there. I've been, even at the time that the whole notion of displaced people was not existing between Iraq and Iran when the war started. We had to go to other places in Iran, and it wouldn't surprise you. Nobody, even in my own country, they like the refugees. That's probably like a fact, just a fact of life. Having said that, just a very question for the three of you, and then we can conclude this subject. Are people right to worry about the number of migrants coming to Europe? Is that we are talking about the quantity? Is the quantity a problem, or does it have to do with the priority of that reception and integration of migrants within EU and the member states? Very short question, and I hope you can answer it. So I start with Anila, and then go to Benoit, and finish up with Tineke.
Thank you, Bahram, for this more complicated but right question. I think no, we shouldn't, because already Europe is the one which holding very less number. If you say Pakistan having Afghan refugee from last 3 decades, Lebanon, now Turkey, and even we didn't even mention the East Africa. I was in Rwanda last week, and I saw how many refugees coming from neighbor countries are there in Uganda, and now again. So there are so many elements. That's why I'm saying we need to correct our information which we are receiving from our media. We need to tackle that, and how we can tackle that, to have work with the migrant and refugee community to get the information right. This is important to know.
Cool. Same question for Benoit. Are the people right to worry about the number, the quantity of the refugees coming to, asylum seekers coming to Europe?
So I think we need to be clear on what we are asking, because in your first question you said migrants, and now you say refugees. And I think,
when you're right, you're right. So I would like
to put you on the spot.
Yes. When you're right, you're right. So that's your. So if you want to make that difference, go on. Refugees, migrants. Go on.
Well, on refugees, I think the numbers are pretty low, and I think there's also about people having the right to ask for protection, and if they would not qualify, they should be able to return. I think that's also a big part that we didn't discuss yet, but if you don't qualify, well. And then for migrants, I think that's a whole other thing, because looking in the Netherlands, it seems that nobody will get their drink served anymore because there's nobody wants to work in the horeca. So I think migration for work, I think, is a whole other, and there is actually a need. And you actually saw Merkel using that quite cleverly in the 2015, because they needed workforce. And she presented it as being a very human action, but it served the economy and led to reputation. And last point on that, because similar to that, when I was in southern Turkey, working on the Syria crisis, regularly we heard of embassies and whatnot who came to the camps to identify people that would qualify for refugees, but they selected the ones that were promising, young students and whatnot. So I think, just to say that sometimes the economic need and interest are used for, well, just not to say, but I think twice the answer is they shouldn't worry.
Okay, cool. And same question, please. Brief answer, Tineke.
Yeah, very brief. They should not worry. I mean, the number is completely doable, especially if we have good asylum procedures in place, so that people can get in a short time clarity in if they can stay or not.
Yeah.
I think here it's really a matter of also educating sounds so paternalistic, but to do more with to put it in perspective for the people. Also to feed public opinion with figures. And also with the moral duty that we have as part of the world and the international community. And here I think, if I would like to touch upon this labor market issue, here I think politicians now are affected by their own framing, because now there's indeed a lack even of labor migrants, which are desperately needed, because they have cemented this fear for migrants, refugees, wherever, all the categories, and this is creating more and more problems.
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe one thing, I think it's also really to put things into perspective. This whole idea that everyone wants to come to the EU, that this is so in contrast with the reality that there's a lot more regional mobility in continents. And this is really also problematic, because that makes it so difficult to combat this opinion. And by not being willing to regularize labor migration, we will be faced with irregular migration continuously, because they find work, but then are exploited and being even only fueling insecurity also for the societies.
Yeah. Okay, since we have 10 minutes-ish to go, and there are a lot of comments, not necessarily, comments with a question mark, but comments, I'm asking people behind the screen, Peter and Laurie, to just highlight maybe 2 questions for the final moments, and maybe they can send it to me by WhatsApp, or just read it aloud. But now I have one of those, for now, of Raoul. Ignoring fear or acting on fear is not the same. Change the narrative, but also honor and respect our responsibilities, plural responsibilities. I don't think we should. I am not. I don't know. It's something went wrong with writing, but I will repeat the first sentences. Ignoring fear or acting on fear is not the same. Change the narrative, but also honor the respect and respect our responsibilities. Who would like to reflect? Oh, Tineke. Yeah. No. Okay, maybe Anila or Benoit? Or should I?
Yeah, I don't mind going first again, but I don't feel Benoit, if you want, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it's a very things to understand how we react. So sometimes it's difficult to ignore the fear, because that's why it's fear. You never ignore the fear. But the thing is, what things are causing this fear? So we feel this fear. We need to realize that. And when it comes to migration, migration is not new. Migration is happening from the as long as human history exists. So, but why this timing, when we have more technology, when we have more facilities, when we have more resources? Why these times of zone right now we are still talking about migration or forced migration? This stuff, I think, that for us to understand why these timings are getting more influx, why we are feeling more uncomfortable discussing in this, and why we are having this fear when even we are so these policies, inhuman policies of from UK sending migrants or refugees from to Uganda instead of Rwanda, to instead of compliance them, and Sweden and Denmark and European countries, they are feeling to follow those kind of policies. So that's why it's required more strong condemn and more strong solidarity.
Okay, there is a question I guess I can address to you, maybe Tineke. What is preventing states to start improving the reception/protection systems in third countries right now? International appeals are usually highly underfunded. I don't see why we should make improving the situation in third countries dependent on adopting more restrictive measures.
This is exactly what I agree with, indeed, and therefore I was calling for a kind of global fund, so that it, because now it always comes late. If a refugee crisis has emerged, it takes too long before there is funding. Many pledges are not fulfilled, or many promises are not kept in the end. So that needs to be much more predictable and sustainable, carried by the most wealthy countries. And indeed, I agree with Ralph that, if there's now an improvement of protection systems, it's mainly driven by the interest of keeping people there and also in exchange for border controls. I really believe that because many people, refugees in the beginning, do not have the idea or incentive to travel further. Many of them want to stay close to the country they fled. They speak the language, have the same culture, but driven due to a lack of possibilities to build a future. So I think it should not be conditional upon border control or readmission, but conditional upon improving the rights of refugees there, so that they can really start and being employed and having their children to school and things like that. I think that should be the way forward.
Yeah, Benoit.
Yes, thanks. Maybe also a reflection on this idea that the region is the solution, and let's not pretend that in other countries that all neighbors get along well. I mean, in Africa, in Middle East, in Asia, in Europe, it's not that because now everybody says, I see the Ukrainians, we like them because they're a bit similar. I mean, this is not true. It's not because you're in Syria that everybody in Lebanon wants to have you over, or Bangladesh, Myanmar. I mean, so let's also not pretend it's all peace and love in the rest. So that's one. And the second thing is, that one, the fear, I think, it's not necessarily true that there's fear. It's a narrative that is being fed to us, right? To be afraid and to say that our culture is being undermined. Tell me, what is our culture? What, 15th century, 12th century? What is, in my case, the Flemish or the Belgium? What is my identity? So that's a whole.
What, Benoit? Are you from Belgian background? And now you are telling us at the end of the conversation? Oh my God.
Right.
Oh my God.
And the third thing is, so there's the not peace and love, there's the narrative that being fed. And the third one is the solutions are also the same, whether, because also, yeah, some people say it costs a lot of money. And it is about investment, right? Most people, if they have their kids, they should know, they would like to go to school. People would like to have a job. They would have security. So whether it's in the country, in the region, or here, preferably where people choose to go, let's maybe start by asking the people what they would like. It needs money. And I think that's indeed what Tineke says. You need to properly invest, because indeed, the camps that we see are not conducive to building a future.
Okay. Please,
may I? Oh, sorry.
Please allow me to have a final question, because there are a lot of great questions and topics are pouring in, so we can use them all for the maybe next sessions in the future. Great, thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate that. Having said that, Benoit, you said just something that maybe can wrap up our conversation. When it comes to organization, NGOs, you said we should change the narrative. It's not about the fear, but the changing narrative. And I wonder, because it's a very important questions for people like you and people working for NGOs. How would you, as an NGO, participating in changing the narrative in a public debate? Is that your responsibility? Is that your task? Would you like to do that more in the future, more than that? Very briefly, and then I will pass the same question to Anila, and then I would ask Tineke to wrap up about this, how she sees that role for you. So first to you, and then Anila, and then Tineke.
No, thanks. It's a good question, and the answer is clearly yes. I think,
yes.
That is our role, and we do that at Stichting Vluchteling. Reporting back to the society what we see. Yeah. And how much
no, not only reporting, but also contributing to change the narrative.
Yeah, but so the narrative, what we do is on the perception, definitely from the human. Like we're all human. Somebody wrote that. I think that was a comment. So that's what we do: to destigmatize, show the people are people. That's definitely part of our mandate. Yeah.
Same question for Anila.
Yes, I think this is what our mission as a New Women Connectors and as on even a global level, we are trying to advocate for refugee meaningful participation, where we pledge in a global refugee forum in 2019, and we are working a lot on this global domain. And I think narrative is the key. How we describe who is the leader, who has the control, who has the spaces to influence these policies. And I saw, Bahram, are you still there? Yes, you are disappeared. So yes, it is the key, and we need to work with the migrant refugee-led organization to change and to showcase the work of contribution they are doing, not only as a low profile job, but also as a leader, as you can read, women leaders, how we are changing to whole domain, especially because Europe is our home.
Okay, Europe is our home. Okay, Tineke, a final question for you. How do you see that as a politician? If those, the NGOs, will put their own ideas, not only reporting, but also, as I said, advocating issues in the public debate.
Yeah, I think this is really vital. I mean, I can express an opinion, but then it is like, that's Groen Links, this is biased. And therefore it's so important to have, I see NGOs working on the ground, they are experts, they know what they are talking about, and this can really feed public opinion. There are so many people who really want to know more. It's not only about that they are simply, have prejudices and that they are not open to that, because there's also a lot of surveys showing that there's still a lot of support for refugees. So, but many politicians frame asylum seekers as being non-refugees and not qualifying for need of protection. And this is polluting the debate often, and this is also diminishing the societal support. So definitely they should play their part. I think everyone, we all have our own role to play, and then together we may increase the support so much needed. Maybe may I say one thing, because Benoit asked in the beginning, who should we target? And I think indeed, apart from the EU, national parliaments are key also to influence the European debate, because the council, because it's so much intergovernmental, there should be more pressure and awareness raising there. You see an increasing debate in national parliaments on pushbacks, for instance, in Belgium, in Germany, in the Netherlands. And this is important because to combat the whole idea this is taking place somewhere else. No, these violations are taking place on behalf of all of us. So we should get, make clear that this responsibility is common. Stop.
Okay. Okay, please allow me to finalize this session. For me, it was very interesting, and I heard something, just try to write, global refugee fund, something new, data, making an international database of all the humanitarian organization, they put it all this in the same database. Very interesting issues. Having said that, Tineke, Anila, and Benoit, thank you. And as I said, participants, very, very much thank you for being with us and sharing your ideas with us. And also thank Peter Heinze and Laurie Bolling, who were there working behind the scene, and especially Laurie, because she's leaving KUNO, unfortunately, but yeah, that's how it goes. And next session, if you like this one, maybe you like the next one as well, September 12th, Monday, September 12th, we will have a conversation with Leo Lucassen, professor at the International Institute of Social History. And so we will talk about climate-induced migration. And after that, we will have a final session about with international NGOs here in the Netherlands to discuss the main learning of our series. Having said that, please keep an eye on the website of KUNO, kunoplatform.nl. And on that note, I would say, please, all of you, go in peace. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.